Well, good evening and welcome to Yada Yahowah Radio. I'm here with Kirk and Dee. It's my pleasure to be with you this wonderful Shabat evening. I'd like to begin by giving you a heads up as to just where we are in the background, where you may not know just by being around the site. But we were able to finish the first 6 chapters of Coming Home, Volume 3. And I also wrote a new final chapter for Coming Home Volume 2, because I moved the final chapter in that book into Coming Home 3. In fact, it's what we're reading and using as the basis of this program tonight, and we have for several nights. After doing that, of course, the realization was that we have now covered enough of the prophecies, in fact, almost all of the major prophecies, pertaining to fulfillment of Pesach, Matzah, and Bakurim by Dowd in year 4000 Yah, 33 CE. And the more we looked, the more obvious it was that there is just no doubt whatsoever. It's blatantly obvious that Dowd was the Passover lamb. So the choice was to do what my preference always is, which is, this is fun. Let's continue to pursue this. Let's go deeper into the Mizmowr and deeper into Yeshayah. The fact is that Yeshayah, the prophet Isaiah, and the Mizmowr of Dowd, the Psalms, are hand in glove prophetically. They one explains the other, and so that was the desire, but it wasn't right. The right choice was to go back and to edit all 27 volumes so that they correctly reflect what we have learned about Dowd, and so that we finally absolve ourselves of any mention of Yosha. The difficulty is I've got nothing wrong. There's nothing that I've got against the name Yosha. It's a wonderful job description. It's a marvelous identity designation. It means Yah was saved. But the fact is there was no one named Yosha in the first century CE. There may have been somebody that chose that name, but our Savior, the Passover Lamb, the soul that fulfilled Matzah, is the most well-known of all Hebrews of all time. His name was Dowd. And so I need to remove that. But fortunately, I do not work alone. We have a wonderful team of publishing, editing, fact-checking. And we decided that we would edit the 3 volumes of Babel first. I did a fairly significant rewrite of Babel 1, which is the book on Daniel. I learned a lot in writing Ezekiel and was able to phrase things a little better and going back. And I did a complete redo of Daniel 9. In fact, the Daniel 9 chapter now is one of the most insightful you'll find anywhere pertaining to the fulfillment of Chag Matzah and then Kippurim, year 4000 and 6000 Yah. Turned out to be a great and enjoyable exercise. And then we're able to complete Babel 2 and Babel 3, the 2 books on Ezekiel, fairly expeditiously. And that's amazing because, they're average 500 plus pages apiece.
Right.
Then the next we decided we would do is Coming Home, since that is the series where we came to this realization, not so much that Dowd was the Pesach El. Since that was true for a very long time, it's the understanding of why he wanted to do it and why Yahweh agreed to it. And so it made sense that we go back to Volume 1 of Coming Home, and the team has a whole checklist of words that they reference, that they put in Burgundy, and that then I go through the chapter and try to rewrite it based upon what we've learned. Unfortunately, and I think Dee, you and Leah had a long talk about this. After you have been through all of these rewrites, and you go back to the first volume of Coming Home, it's like you went back in time 10 years. Everything that I wrote was true, and everything that I wrote was reasonably well written. I read these things from the perspective of having recently edited Questioning Paul, I assume, because I spent way too much time showing how these Mizmowr were exposing and condemning Shaul, Paul, the author of and inspiration for most of the Christian New Testament. But that's not the purpose of Coming Home. The purpose of Coming Home is reaching out to Jews, Yehudim, introducing them to Yahweh, introducing to their Messiahs, Dowd, introducing them to the Son of God, who is Dowd, telling them that Pesach, Matzah, and Bakurim, Shabuah have been fulfilled, and they were fulfilled in 3,000 Yah, and to explain how it is their religion who deceived them by not only denying that they were fulfilled, but having Rabbi Akiba come up with a false Messiah to try to explain away what actually happened in 33 CE. And so it was a complete rewrite.
Awesome.
Now, the good news about that is now that the opening 3 chapters, which I've gotten through, I'm about 100 pages into it, are now laser beam focused on our target audience. Yes, we're very delighted when a Goyim listens to this program, read these books, decides to join Yahweh's family. Yahweh's thrilled. I'm thrilled. We're all thrilled. Our mission is to make certain that every Yehud and Israelite that Yahweh is interested in knowing and spending eternity with is given the information they need to know who Yahweh is, what he's offering and expects in return, to appreciate who the Mashiach is, and the Ben Elohim, Son of God, the Pesach El, and the Shepherd, all the same person, Dowd. That is our mission. We do not want Yahweh and Dowd coming back to an empty room. We want Yom Kippurim, and they want Yom Kippurim to contain everyone who is open to and willing to know Yahweh and his Son. And so it is enjoyable to get it repositioned correctly. And oh my, when you go back through Mizmowr 1, 2, 3, and 4, with the understanding that there are 3 comings, 3 lives of Dowd.
It's profound.
They sing to you. It really is a wonderful experience. And so what I would expect is that sometime within the next week, it is likely that we will get the first 6 volumes of Coming Home 3 published on the website. I think there's one more chapter to do a final edit, pass on, and then we'll get that published on the website. I'm expecting that, in fact, I know that Babel 1, 2, and 3 have been re-edited and republished both at Amazon and on the website, and that the team is busy now editing the work that I did to rewrite the first 100 pages of Coming Home. So we'll continue to progress in doing this. After Coming Home 1, we'll do Coming Home 2, and then an Introduction to God 1, 2, and 3, and then I'll start with the Yada Yahowah series, Observation, and the last thing I plan to do is Questioning Paul in terms of this realization. So that's where we are in the process. Next thing is that I wrote a concluding statement to Babel 3 that was probably my favorite concluding paragraph of any book or series that we have written. But it had a line in it that I guess has caused some consternation among some of the covenant members, which suggests, that, not only are you going to join us, but will there be anyone in Shamayim that is part of the covenant family that can turn to you and say that to a significant degree they're here because of what you shared with them. And so that's caused other people to say, well, man, I need to up my game. And that wasn't the intent. We have so many wonderful contributors to the Covenant family, and there's so many ways to contribute, and everybody has different demands on their lives. We're really not out to be out promoting Yahweh's message as we are just to make it available. So I do have, though, a suggestion, and I've started this now about 10 days ago. I decided to go ahead and register for Jerusalem Post, and so it's jpost.com. And the reason I did is because the Jerusalem Post has the best comments. It's not a chat room. It's just comments on the articles, and then the ability to interact with those who have made comments of any news site that I have been part of. And, I recognize that the Jerusalem Post is a liberal periodical, but for the most part, I think they do a decent job of reporting news in Israel. It's the first newspaper I read every morning. It's the last newspaper I read every day. And so I decided that I would register. I registered under Yada Yahowah, and I've probably made 40 posts over the last 10 days, maybe 6 to 8 even today. And I've been pleasantly surprised by the response. I'm very critical of the Heralds. I think that they're parasites. I think they're hypocrites. And so I'm openly critical of the Heralds. I'm openly critical of progressives. And so when you express views that are that strongly worded with conclusions like that, you would expect that you would have some serious pushback. But thus far, no. I get when I write something that is opposed to the Heralds, about a quarter of those who post on in the Jerusalem Post are Heralds. They always say they dislike it, but none of them are adventurous enough or literate enough to respond. There's a Christian on the site that I love to toy with, but he's not sparring material. He's just really, really dumb. But it's fun to point out his errors for the others that are reading the chat room. And there are our target audience in Israel is not the 30 to 40% of Israelis that are progressives. They are way too political and too indoctrinated and too unwilling to be judgmental for Yahweh's message to resonate. And it's not the 30 or 40% that are ultra-Orthodox, particularly the Heralds. Very few of them are even around the internet, and they're religious zombies. So you're not going to register with them either. But that leaves 20 to 30% of Israelites that you can resonate with. You can have a communication with. You can convey Yahweh's testimony in such a way that they find it interesting if you engage them thoughtfully on whatever the subject is. And that's the key. You can't go in there as an evangelist, if you will, using the stupid Christian term, I'm sorry. But you can't go in there as promoting Yada Yahowah and say, go read this and copying the website. That's not what I do. I always engage on the subject. I always respond directly to what someone else has written, or I make a point that is directly on the subject, and then toss in something that leads people to think about who Yahweh is and who the religious are and the like. And so I would encourage more of our listeners to go to jpost.com, register, and contribute. I've told people for a long time, the worst thing you can do is to contribute by simply copying and pasting what I have written, or by directing people to what I have written. If you're going to engage like that, you need to own the material. You've got to convey it as if you wrote it, that you know it, that you own it, and make certain that you're speaking in a manner that's consistent with Yahweh's approach to politics, which is less politics is better politics. But we're still dealing with Israel. It's the only country where I would actually be supportive of the military, because the Muslims around are trying to eradicate them. So it's something
at
to
this point in
consider.
time, that's all they have.
Yes, it is true. All right, so there's a couple of things that I want to talk about in the news. These are all Jerusalem Post articles. I was shocked to learn that the Ukrainian Secret Service attempted to assassinate Russian President Vladimir Putin. They sent a drone to an industrial park where he was scheduled to speak with U.S.-made explosives, 17 kilograms of explosives all total, of a type that is manufactured only in the United States and Canada. And had it succeeded, they would have killed Vladimir Putin, which would have been among the most disastrous moves in the history of a country that is completely out of control. Next item in the news is that the right in Israel finally pushed back somewhat. They had a rally in Jerusalem. 200,000 people showed up. It's hard to have 200,000 people show up for a rally and underperform, but they did, because the promoters had a little Trumpism in them, and they billed it as the Million Man March. Well, 200,000 is a lot of people to have show up for a rally, but it's 1/5 of a million. The biggest problem they had is they, including Benjamin Netanyahu, they referred to themselves as being tired of being second-class citizens, since the progressives and the liberals rallying in Tel Aviv were getting all of the news and all of the attention. They felt slighted, so they had this rally, and it was in favor of judicial reform. And yet there was very little discussion about the proper way to proceed with judicial reform. I did write a number of posts regarding this, and Israel has a serious problem with their high court, which is that there is no constitution, no Bill of Rights. And so about 10 years ago, the high court got to be exceedingly liberal and invasive, and started ruling based on their politics any subject that they wished to, including striking down the laws that the Knesset was making, but without any basis in doing so. You know, the U.S. Supreme Court is limited to a single document. All they can do is make a ruling based upon the U.S. Constitution. Is it supported by the U.S. Constitution? Is it contrary to the U.S. Constitution? That's all they've got. In Israel, there is no Constitution, and there is no Bill of Rights. So my recommendation to Israel is, since you are having now 75 years of difficulty writing a constitution, then if you want to pass judicial reform, at least establish a Bill of Rights. That's a good starting place, and that's the compromise. Let people know on a Bill of Rights that they can choose of their own volition to be secular or religious. They can choose to be straight or gay. They can choose to marry or divorce. They can choose to immigrate or not. But their rights are protected because those rights are guaranteed in a Bill of Rights. And it would go a long way to forming a compromise that everyone could live with within Israel. But the biggest issue, of course, that Israel has is a separation of sectarian and secular. With the Netanyahu coalition, the religious want to be granted all manner of special situations where they're paid money to be religious, and they don't have to work, and they don't have to serve in the military. And these things are tearing the country apart. So it is a serious issue, and because the Netanyahu government has not gone after judicial reform in an intelligent way, Netanyahu's popularity has plummeted. Now Benny Gantz is like 7 or 8 Knesset seats ahead of the Likud party, which it dominated at the last election. So not turning out well for Israel. One of the reasons that the rally, however, was a lot fewer people than they expected is there were no black suits at the rally. The Haredim stayed away. The Haredim didn't stay away because, well, they were busy doing something else, because of course they weren't. They don't work. It wasn't because they don't do group. You tell the Haredim to jump, and 1,000 of them will jump off a cliff. No, that wasn't the reason. It wasn't that they were opposed to judicial reform because they really want judicial reform. No, the reason will kill you. A Haredim newspaper, the day of the rally, wrote an article that said that any Haredim that Haredi member, that's the black suits, ultra-Orthodox Jew, that attends the rally is excommunicated from the house of God. And the reason is that in Judaism, only the rabbis can make a political statement. Only the rabbis are qualified to make any decision in this regard. So only the rabbis can engage in politics, and the people, because they don't know as much as the rabbis and are too dumb, have to just go along with whatever the rabbis tell them. So you have a religion that says you have to stay home because you have no free will, and you're such a moron that you ought not show up. And because you're so stupid, if you do show up, you're excommunicated from this religion. So I had a field day with that.
Not bad.
But that is indeed what they wrote. You should check out the article, JerusalemPost.com, and read what the Haredi publication told. It's faithful as to why they should not attend and what would happen to them if they did attend. I've been reading a number of articles on the young boy, Teixeira, that is accused of disclosing the U.S. Classified documents that are really exceedingly embarrassing. I go back to the same thing with all exposed documents, including the Hillary Clinton emails that probably had an effect on her losing that election against Donald Trump. If you're embarrassed by people disclosing your emails and your documents, then you shouldn't have written them. It isn't. You have no right to complain that my privacy was invaded, and you shouldn't know that I'm a hypocrite. And of course, that's the issue with the United States. To say that they violated national security by releasing these documents is to say what we had to say in those documents is so embarrassing that it negates our credibility. It's harder for us to fool you and lie to you as a nation if you know what we really think. That happened to be the Tucker Carlson issue, by the way. For those who listen to Tucker Carlson, he was the most popular show on television in terms of a commentator. He was so Fox News fired their single most popular host, and the reason they fired him is that they lost. They didn't lose. They settled a nearly $800 million suit against where Dominion voting machines had sued them because they had their program hosts had trumped the message that the Donald had, that the machines were controlled by the Chinese and that they weren't reporting votes correctly. Now, to make that kind of a statement, so long as you're clever about how you say it, and say, there's some concern that the software could be invaded, that somebody, the machines maybe aren't as legitimate as they should be. And there's always an internet bozo out there that's got an article that says that some expert has proven it. And you can say it, but what you can't do is what Tucker Carlson did, which is in all of his private communications and texts, he made a mockery of what he was saying. Saying, of course, it's not true. The machines are just fine. And with profanity-laced texts, he admitted that he knew what he was reporting on his program was false. And that you can't do. And that's why he was fired. That's why they settled the case, is that Tucker Carlson's private communication did him in. Now, one of the things that I'm bothered by on all of that is that I probably listened to 20 or 30 of Tucker Carlson's shows, so I'm not an expert on Tucker Carlson. But of the 20 or 30 shows I've listened to, I'd say 10 of them were bold, well researched, and he said things that nobody else is saying. His position on the Ukrainian war, while only about 1% as conclusive as my own or as well researched as my own, at least he is the only popular television host who is opposed to the war. I applaud him for that. And he is typically the lone host that will go after the liberal media and liberal politicians' hypocrisy as it relates to the way they manipulate the news and act. At least 20%, 30% of the shows that I watched were forthright. They were really good. And about a third, he was with a very shrill voice. He was just annoying. It's not so much what he said was untrue. It's just that why in the world is he saying it? It's not entertaining. It's not informative. And about a third was kind of down the middle for a television host. So I would give him an A- in terms of a quality host in this regard, newsmaker. But when you read or you listen to his programs in favor of Donald Trump, and then you read his text where he says, "I hate the man's guts," you know you're dealing with a hypocrite, and hypocrisy is a problem. The biggest issue, though, is that while I don't think there is a anti-Semitic bone in his body, I don't think he's an anti-Semite by any means. The ADL wants to find anti-Semites in anyone who isn't exceedingly progressive and liberal. And so they're applauding his dismissal in such a way that you read their comments and it makes you want to puke as to how many anti-Semites are being manufactured by the ADL because of its exceedingly liberal stance and exaggerating things against anyone whose conservative politics they do not like. But as it relates to share, I was reading what the propaganda ministry is now putting out, that he wanted to kill lots of people and that he had Russian paraphernalia around his bedroom. Now, he had one pen that was a Russian pen. Most of his paraphernalia was camouflage. He just loved playing army. He lived in a room wallpapered in camouflage and camouflage netting, and had a gun safe right by his bed. I mean, this kid loved playing army, and that's one of the real problems, because he did have a social media presence and said things that clearly were inappropriate for a young man to say, and yet he was given an exceedingly high clearance to have access to secret U.S. documents, which tells you that the U.S. military does not know how to vet anyone, and it wouldn't have been difficult. All they would have had to do is go to his Facebook site to know these things. So it is it's a real embarrassment to the U.S. government, not only what he posted, but also embarrassing to them because of what they actually wrote, but also in their vetting. We had a conniption fit against a European Union politician. Her name is von der Leyen. She wrote a congratulatory message to Israel on Israel's 75th birthday, and she used the phrase, "You are to be congratulated for making the desert bloom." Common phrase associated with Israel, and they have. The Israelites are not only exceedingly industrious in this regard, and exceedingly proficient at farming. Their water management techniques are the best in the world. They have not only figured out how to maximize the use of the watershed of the Galilee and how to turn what was an mosquito-infested swamp in many areas into a great source of water that is judiciously used, but their drip irrigation is the best in the world. And so they have made the desert bloom. And if you look at what Israel was in 1948, when Jews were allowed back into their homeland, versus what it is now, it's a magnitude of 100 to 1 superior. But the Pakistanians had a conniption fit and said, by you congratulating the Israelis for making the desert bloom, you are a racist, and you must resign from your position and deny your comment because you're implying that we weren't here previously and that it wasn't our land. Wow. These boys are lost. Speaking of lost, do you know that in San Francisco, homicides, murders soared 83% through March of this year? 83%. You know, if your homicides have soared 83% in the first 3 months of the year, you have a serious problem. The progressive policies of San Francisco are not working. You know, you need to fire every politician, everybody in leadership in your Justice Department, and start over again. Truly amazing just how destructive progressives have been on matters like this. All right, with this said, I'm going to turn back to where we were at Captain Kirk's insistence. We jumped out of where we were into the 22nd Mizmowr because it is so evident, overwhelming, that Dowd was the Pesach El, and that's a big deal. I mean, knowing who made that sacrifice on behalf of his people is a really, really big deal. And so we had reached Mizmowr 9 and 10, which I'll rephrase this evening, and then continue to comment on them. I made a comment, however, that turns out I was right. It was one where Leah in particular says, "Nah, I'm not buying that. There's no way that's true." And I said, "No, I'm really convinced it's true." And she says, "Well, you'll never be able to prove it." She says, "You're right. I'll never be able to prove it, but I know Dowd. I've spent 22 years now studying the man. I know him. I know how he operates. There's more to him volunteering to be in the Pesach El than just he needed to earn the respect of his people." And what I said was that Dowd made a deal with Yahowah. And his deal with Yahowah is, I'm going to do this, but I want a favor. I want what I do to apply to Absalom. Absalom was the son that rebelled against him, who was killed, and he rebelled against him because of something Dowd did. When Dowd's eldest son raped his daughter, Dowd didn't intervene and chastise him for it, and so Absalom, it was his sister, went and defended her honor and killed Dowd's firstborn son. And so Dowd really had himself to blame, at least to a significant degree, with how things transpired, and he dearly loved Absalom, even when Absalom was doing things he never should do. And so you'd start with, what is Absalom's name? Ab, father.
My father is
Shalom. So father reconciles. So my position is that Dowd would have said, as part of me carrying the guilt of my people into Sheol to deposit it there, I want Absalom's as well. I want to carry his guilt because I'm responsible to some degree for what happened, and I love my son. I want to redeem him too. And I am certain that the love of a father for his son, both with Yahowah and his son Dowd, and Dowd and his son Absalom, that they reached an agreement. And the reason I know this is that the third Mizmowr is dedicated to Absalom. And it speaks of Dowd serving as the Pesach El and fulfilling matzah to reconcile these issues. So I do think that that was part of the equation. And it is so perfect for Dowd to want to do this. It is so perfect for Yahowah to agree to allow it to occur. It was a magnificent sacrifice that Dowd offered to make, and I think it was a reasonable request under those circumstances. So anyway, I think that was right. I think there's another reason, therefore, that Dowd fulfilled this role. He had a lot to redeem: his own reputation, that of his people, that of his son. So it's easy to see why he chose to do this. All right, here's Mizmowr Psalm 22, 9 and 10. It reads, "Before you I was cast out of the point of origin as an act of compassion and love. From the womb of my mother, you are my God." Very unique situation here. Dowd has been here twice already before, lived 2 lives, and would live a third. And the second of the 3, he was cast out of the point of origin. He had been with Yahowah in heaven for 1,000 years at this point. And then from the womb of his mother, he was born. He is the child who was born, the son who was given of Yeshayahu 9. This is one of maybe 20 references in the Psalms that affirm that he is the child who was born and the son who was given. From my mother's womb, you are my God. So he was a unique situation. This soul, when he was born, because it was Dowd's soul, had a long history with his father, and knew him personally at birth, which is certainly unique among humans. So during their initial romp through the paddock, if you will, and I'm not to say that disparagingly, Yahowah says, I brought you out of the paddock to tend my flock. It's likely that Dowd and Yahowah first met when he was shepherding sheep in Bethlehem. In fact, it's certain that they met while he was shepherding sheep in Bethlehem, perhaps as early as 5 to 7 years young. He was anointed at 8. It was probably 5 to 7 years old when Yahweh said, "This young man has all the characteristics I'm looking for." He would be introduced to us as the anointed Messiah, as I said, at 8 years old. And it was then that the boy who had not known the love of a mother or the devotion of a father was embraced by the best of both. The Ruach Kodesh came upon him as his spiritual mother, and Yahweh became his father. Now, that's a serious upgrade. Upon his return, their father and son relationship was already well developed, having spent the past 1,000 years together. And this time, at least initially, Dowd would enjoy the love of his adoptive family. Since the Passover lamb had to be a descendant of Dowd based upon the prophecies, he had to be a person. God isn't among Dowd's seed. Sorry, Twistians, but you've got a problem with that. Recognizing then that human being was the only, a human being is the only viable option, we are faced with the realization that it would have been impossible for him to be perfect in every thought, deed, and phrase. Therefore, the Pesach El, Passover lamb, be without fault, and this would be accomplished by observing the Torah, by being anointed with the Spirit. By being anointed with the Spirit and observing the Torah, even an imperfect individual is made to appear perfect before God, and that's what counts. Its purpose is to perfect the imperfect, and it applies to everyone, but most especially to Dowd. He said as much, and we should take him at his word. In this regard, there is no basis for the notion that Mary, in the unlikely event that this would have been her name, was unmarried or a virgin. In Hebrew society, there were no marriage vows. A woman traveling with a man, living with him, and raising a family was either his wife or his concubine. Also pursuant to his reentry, by Dowd, or using Dowd's soul, his parents' genealogy was considerably less vital, which is why the prophets do not provide it. Now, for what it's worth, Miriam would not have been a good choice of names. It is from Mary, and directly related to Mary Ba. I have a good friend who is named Mary, and she listens to this program. I'm not besmirching your name, my friend, but I do need to expose the origins of Mary. It is directly related, as I say, to Meribah, as in the waters of Meribah. It means contentious, rebellious, and embittered, and it speaks of provoking strife. The secondary definition of Mary is gross and domineering battling. I can assure you, my friend Mary is none of these things. And the birth mother of Dowd in his second coming was none of these things, which is why I do not think her name was Mary. Mary is actually from the verbal root mar'ah, to be disobedient and rebellious. Yes, it was also the same name of Moshe's sister. But in her case, since Yahweh struck her with leprosy, it appears to have been fitting.
Oh.
Should you wonder why Dowd's nephesh couldn't just arrive and be inserted into a 30-year-old body and skip past this process, the answer is that to accept the guilt of his people, he needed to become familiar with them. Further, even with the failure of Israelites to recognize him, it was important that they be given every opportunity to do so. So, while he was far from an ordinary Jewish boy, as is possible, he was born in the normal manner to a typical mother and father whose names we do not know and then lived among his people. By the way, should there be any validity to the notion that Gabriel met with Dowd's birth mother, then that conversation would have been entertaining. Because Gabriel is from Gabor and El. It describes Dowd as the most courageous and compassionate man of God. So it would be something like this. Hi, Mom. I'm going to be your kid, even though I'm also your great-grandfather 50 times over. You may have heard of me. Anyway, I'm going to be slaughtered as the Passover lamb, so don't get too attached. And that's actually the easy part, because come Matzah, I'm going to hell. So chat again, say in 9 months. See you later, Mom.
Oh, wow.
Okay. With these thoughts dancing in our minds as we move on to the next statement, we find that the then, future, and now past sacrificial soul is pleading with Yahweh, asking him not to abandon him. He recognizes that he is headed for a rendezvous with Satan, the adversary, where he will be afflicted. He knows that nothing exists which can protect him from this ordeal. It is his destiny, and it is what he chose. And this, too, was necessary. We find that Dowd is now speaking about the means to fulfill unyeasted bread. His soul was headed to the place of Rakak, being severed and avoided, removed and separated. He was bemoaning Sheol, the lightless prison where imperfect spiritual souls endure eternity. Separation from Yahweh is the only appropriate penalty for those who have led others away from God. This means that without the perfecting implications of matzah, where our souls are unleavened from the fungus of religion and politics, the aforementioned sacrifice on Pesach, where we become mortal, would otherwise be counterproductive. Dowd's soul asks of Yahweh, do not continually distance yourself from me by allowing your relationship with me to be severed for a prolonged period. Al Rakak Min Ani. Do not actually recede from me, avoiding me beyond the needed period. With you sending me so far away from you, there is no return. It's the call stem, which speaks of that which is actual and literal, the imperfect conjugation, which speaks of that which is ongoing, and the jussive, which is either an indication that this is a statement that is negated, or third will expressed in third person, but there is no third person in this comment. So it is a negated part of Rakak. So if the imperfect is negated, speaks of ongoing action, if you negate it, what do you have? Something that is not ongoing. So it says, there are some times where the conjugations are important, and there's sometimes they are everything. If Dowd had said, don't ever, under any circumstance, allow your relationship with me to be severed, then he could not have fulfilled matzah.
Couldn't do that.
Because matzah is about his soul being severed. So he has to have his soul's relationship with Yahweh sent to Sheol so that he is separated for the duration of matzah. But if his soul is separated on an ongoing basis, if he's like every other arrival in Sheol that never leaves, then he isn't fulfilling matzah. So the only possibility is for him to say, I understand that I'm going to be separated, but don't allow that separation to endure any longer than is necessary. And that's the way it was written. And it's why there is so much value to the Hebrew stems and conjugations. So do not continually distance yourself from me by allowing your relationship with me to be severed for a prolonged period because the oppressive confinement and anguish, Sarah, is imminent. Sarah is an exceedingly important word. It is not only the basis of Mitzrayim. No, the children of Israel were slaves in Mitzrayim. Yahweh, working through Moshe, freed them. He liberated them. So what did he liberate them from if Mitzrayim is a compound of ma, which means to ponder the implications of being confined, being imprisoned, being anguished, being troubled, being oppressed, and it's plural. So Mitzrah becomes Mitzrayim. So it's a many of those things. So we understand that the reason Yahweh uses Mitzrayim and not Egypt, the Greek term, is because he liberated his people from being confined, from being controlled, from being anguished and troubled and oppressed. Secondarily, the exodus from Mitzrayim that has Sarah in the midst of it is also to be understood in the time of Jacob's troubles. The time of Jacob's troubles is from Shar, same word. And it doesn't just speak of Yisrael being anguished and subjugated and oppressed, but also of the nation being confined, being restricted in size, which is the result of the imposition of the two-state solution. So it is exceedingly revealing there where Yahweh is also offering to liberate the children of Israel from the time of Jacob's troubles, where Sar is the bookend for these two opportunities for freedom. And in the middle of that, we have Dowd saying, I know that I am going to experience Sarah, confinement and oppression. Just please don't have it last any longer than what I've signed up for, which is during Matzah. And so he endured it so that we wouldn't have to, so that Yahweh could equitably save his people from it. It's a very important word, particularly in this context. And for him to say it is imminent, personal, approaching, and near in space-time, tells us that he was about to relinquish the body he was occupying as the Pesach El and be carried by the set-apart spirit into Sheol. It concludes by saying, and yet indeed, no one can help Azar. It's negated here by Ain, so that there is no assistance here. I'm going to have to endure this on my own. So, first of all, thank God for the Hebrew language with its conjugations. Otherwise, this would have been both unbearable for Dowd. He couldn't have volunteered to do it. And with the imperfect, if it hadn't been negated and the rakak separation had been ongoing and continuous, then Dowd could not have fulfilled matzah. But with it being negated, it's the perfect explanation. When I put myself into the scene painted by Dowd's words, and when I try to feel what he was experiencing at this moment, it strikes me that he wasn't complaining about enduring the horrific pain associated with Roman flogging, or even the excruciating nature of crucifixion. It's pretty amazing. Instead, he was lamenting the anguish of his relationship with Yahweh being momentarily severed. It was thought of the imminent, unavoidable, and temporal distancing from his father in Sheol, the lyre of Satan, that it would be so anguishing that it was what he was dreading most, and yet he had volunteered for it. He wasn't telling God, don't
Take the cup from me.
Don't keep me out of it. I'm not reneging on my desire to do this. I'm just saying, make certain we have a deal here. I'm trusting you. You're trusting me. I want it to be for as short a period of time as is absolutely possible. Now, since Sarah serves as the operative verb defining the Israelite subjugation within the religious and political regime, as I mentioned, of Mitzrayim, it's obvious now that Dowd was indeed presenting his matzah exodus from Sheol as a intensely personal reenactment of the Yatsa exodus, his anguish, or the Yatsa anguish exodus of his people. The Hebrew word for exodus is Yatsa. He's equating the two. He wants the reader to equate the two. His anguish would come from Sarah being constrained and diminished, which is what happens in the black hole of Sheol, hell, and of being incarcerated. With Sarah, it would be distressing, emotionally anguishing, and painful. And during this time, he would be with the Sarah, the rival and competitor to God's company, the adversary. Hell would be Sarah, vexing, a time of troubling tribulation and oppressive affliction. Hasatan, which is the Hebrew definition of title really for the adversary, has long been Dowd's rival. And Hasatan is far more Dowd's rival than Yahweh's rival. With Yahweh, he is a useful annoyance. Useful in the sense he provides a viable alternative to choosing to have a relationship with Yahweh. But, it's a navel floss by comparison. So Hasatan's primary adversary is Dowd. If he can undo what Dowd did in the minds of people, then he prevails. He can't undo what God did. But he can certainly convince people that Dowd was not the Passover lamb, that Passover and Matzah and Bikurim were not fulfilled, that Dowd isn't returning, that Dowd is dead and buried, as the man that he possessed, known as Paul, would write. Mm-hmm. So he views Dowd as his rival, and he has done everything he can to discredit Dowd. He saw himself in competition with him for human souls. But as a result of what Dowd has done, when he returns, Satan will be cast into Sheol, and he's going to remain. There he will experience Sarah, incarceration, being bound, constrained, and diminished. These are attributes of Sheol, which is essentially a black hole. By the way, the idea that after 1,000 years Satan is going to be released, no. Only one person got released. Yeah, that was Dowd. There'd be no reason to release Hasatan. It's one of the many myths of Revelation. Further, as we consider Sarah, it's the word that Yahweh used, as I shared a moment ago, to depict the time of Jacob's troubles. This suggests that Dowd will have endured Sarah on behalf of his people, Yisrael, thereby earning the right to liberate them from their troubles on Kippurim. Dowd's ordeal on behalf of Yisrael would be karub, imminent, personal, unavoidable, and near. At a place and moment in space-time of a location and duration from the perspective of the participant, bad things were going to happen. Dowd knew it. A hellacious price would be paid to honor Yahweh's matzah promise to perfect the covenant family. Dowd's nephesh soul would be laden with all of the guilt of every covenant member, so that he would take it into Sheol and deposit it there. And with it removed from us, we also appear perfect in Yah's eyes. Dowd's foreboding song reveals that on the cusp of being tormented by Satan, the Romans continued to humiliate him, ripping the flesh from the remnant of his body, and to think that for most Jews and Christians alike, it was for naught. That's the saddest part of this whole thing. It's as if the Passover and unyeasted bread were never fulfilled. Grotesquely sad.
Yes.
That our Messiah, Shepherd and King, the Son of God, was tormented in this way by the most evil empire in the history of humanity, Rome, while his people stood by and watched. And even when they stood by and watched, no one recognized him. The text reads, numerous, fiercely aggressive soldiers, bullish beasts of the aggressively attacking supernatural serpent surround me. They have besieged and crowned me in hostile fashion. Mizmowr Song 22:12. Rome was famous for her disgusting soldiers who were free to rape and rob and torment anyone. A bad day was when a Roman legion showed up in your town. And here their might was focused on tormenting a single soul. The bullish beasts of the aggressively attacking supernatural serpent, well, that would be the devil's brood. It's always translated as somebody from Bashan, but all you got to do is look up Bashan in a Hebrew lexicon, and it's snake. It's rated to Bashana, which also means shame, which is a metaphor for Satan. They surround me. They have besieged and crowned me in hostile fashion. You know, I do not know if the crown of thorns was put on Dowd's head. It would be way too bizarre a story to make up because of these two references. You know, the Passover lamb on Mount Moriah that Yahweh provided for Abraham and for Yishak had its horns caught in a thorn bush, and here now the Passover lamb is mocked by Rome with a crown of thorns. And here in the 22nd Mizmowr, Dowd talks about it.
Yeah.
Likely happened. Likely happened. I wouldn't take any credence from the Christian narrative, but sometimes you read things in the story that are so bizarre that without basis, it's just no one's going to make it up. A beer here is a clever choice of words because it depicts fiercely aggressive soldiers. In the first instance, when modifying par, bullish beasts and wild asses, and then describes an aggressively attacking supernatural serpent when paired with Bashan in the second. He would initially feel the sting of Roman warriors and then that of powerful Malach fighting on behalf of the adversary. Often worshipped as a sun god, Lord Baal was represented by a par bull, not only because of its strength, but because the sun crosses the constellation of Taurus the bull during Pesach, Passover. For everything Yahweh does, Shakar, as Satan's last name would be, has a counterfeit. Therefore, to redeem his people, Dowd's soul would have to endure the worst tortures that the Roman Empire and Satan and his full cadre of demons could muster. Either way, these were fierce fighters capable of inflicting painful injury. And also keep in mind that the children of Israel spent 40 years in the wilderness for a singular reason. They continued to be too religious to go into the promised land. And their first act of religiosity was to build this, what is called, in most English translations, a golden calf. It was a golden bull. And the reason they built crafted the bull is because the Apis, the bull cult, was the foremost cult among the pharaohs. They were slaves of the pharaoh. And so Yahweh releases them, the real God, releases them from Mitzrayim, and the first thing they do is they build an image of the very fake God that the Pharaoh who had enslaved them and abused them used as a ruse. It's exceedingly sad. And it's exceedingly sad that while it is patently obvious that the reason that Moshe had to herd disgruntled and cantankerous Jews around the wilderness for 40 years is because he couldn't get the religiosity out of them. They were so religious they could not be allowed to infect the promised land in that mindset. And yet Jews date their religion back to the time of Moses and claim that, well, they were given the oral Torah at the same time, which is, of course, utter nonsense. No, they were actually kept out of the promised land for 40 years because they were religious. The religious, which is the very thing that was holding them back. As they were ripping the body of the Passover lamb to shreds, tearing it apart with their whips, and his soul felt the burning sting of every lash. Dowd's anguish on behalf of Yisrael and the covenant family was no less torturous than being flayed alive. Second only to crucifixion, it was the most abhorrent way to die. And while Romans inflicted the carnage, not a single Jew lifted a finger to spare their Messiah and King of the needless anguish. Passover lamb needs to die. It's never supposed to be tortured.
Yes.
A painless death would have sufficed, but
yes.
not for the Romans. Even as a church, they love torturing Jews. Long before these sadistic implements of pain were conceived, Dowd wrote of what he would experience. Blood would have dripped from his pen. Sarah conveys mangling of the flesh by ripping it from the body with sharp objects, providing a poignant yet accurate description of the abuse inflicted by 50 lashings of a metal barbed whip, which was Rome's approach to those they perceived as threats to their supremacy. All of a sudden now, it does make sense as to why Rome would seek to crucify him. You know, this notion that the Jewish religious leaders turned him in and they negotiated with Pontius Pilate and convinced Pontius Pilate that he had to die. The Jews were therefore the schemers is utter nonsense. The religious community in Israel was doing everything they could behind the scenes and in public letters to get Pontius Pilate dismissed. Yeah, he was no friend of the religious, and the religious hated him. And so they were not going to have a powwow. If the religious wanted something and they went to Pontius Pilate, they would have got the opposite. So there is, Pontius Pilate was there at the time. And Dowd was no doubt crucified, which was their way of doing away with the most egregious threats to them. And the number one way to be a threat is to claim to have been a king. Dowd is the King of Kings. And so it is apparent why Rome would have crucified him. Removing muscle tissue from Dowd's shoulders, back, chest, arms, and legs was insufficient by Roman standards. Our great hero would go on to describe the most horrid form of execution ever conceived by man. 5 centuries before crucifixion with ropes was invented by the Assyrians, and 700 years before it was perfected by the Romans to include nails, Dowd previews its piercing violence. We're about to discover that his prophecies are painfully precise. So that you'll be able to more fully appreciate what follows, one of crucifixion's most telling attributes is that it causes the victim's body fluids to drain into their lungs, leaving them parched. While dying of thirst, they drown. Bones are not broken, but both shoulder joints and other major joints are dislocated. Oxygen depletion occurs because the victim is unable to stretch their diaphragm while hanging from their arms. This causes carbon dioxide toxicity in the bloodstream. This results in strength melting away, starting with the heart muscles. Now, we know all this today, but not 3,000 years ago, which is when these words were inscribed by Dowd. That makes this depiction extraordinary. Not only in the sense that it was 500 years before crucifixion was invented, and 2,500 years before we would understand why it causes these symptoms, but because he was writing about what he had volunteered to endure. His physical mortality was ebbing away. He wrote, "As water, I am poured out and weakened, and all of my most substantial bones are stretched. They are separated and out of joint. My heart is now like wax. It has melted, wasting away within my eternal organs. Like sun-baked dust, my vigor and strength are withered and have failed. My tongue cleaves to the roof of my mouth. So upon the dust of death they have placed me, validating why I am here." That's true. It's precisely how crucifixion kills, right down to its most unique symptoms.
Yes.
The victim's inability to inhale robs their body of oxygen and thus energy, causing koach, helpless incapacity to perform any needed function. Likewise, Yabesh, in the association with Mia Ba Tewek, describes a withering, paralyzed state in which the body no longer responds to the brain's motor function commands. The textual base of Sheret's pashard is identical to Sharash, meaning to be silent while others plot evil, devising a plan of action that cuts and separates. All the while, his expendable physical body, comprised of the elements of the earth, was broken, being deprived of the fluids, being drained into his lungs, suffocating him. Maweth is death personified. It is the disease that plagued us. Fully amplified, Maweth conveys the physical trauma of the body dying, the infection of a disease that causes death, and a judgment in which the penalty is a death sentence. It is derived from, and at the consonant root, it is spelled identically to muth, those who are executed and dispatched to die. The body Dowd's soul was still clinging to was in the final throes of serving as the Passover lamb. It would soon die, and do so that we would not suffer that same consequence. Then his soul would be laden with the corruption of his people and taken to Sheol, the place of separation, in our stead. By bearing Yisrael's rebellion against Yahweh, he exonerated and pardoned his people on unyeasted bread. The character of overtly political and religious individuals hasn't changed over the years. They are still dirty dogs, and I'm not degrading canines. Addressing the Romans who became Roman Catholics, Dowd declared, "For indeed, the contemptible scum and abased yelpers have surrounded me. A politicized religious community providing the testimony of the disastrously corrupt establishes a destructive annual cycle, denigrate what I am doing. They bore into my hands and my feet." There are insights here that should cause anyone who is religious to scream and walk away. The politicized religious community providing testimony of the disastrously corrupt that establishes a destructive annual cycle to denigrate what I'm doing is equal parts Judaism and Christianity. In Judaism, the primary event that an ordeal that Dowd was going to endure, which is matzah, taking our guilt and depositing it in Sheol, they no longer separate. It's no longer a mikra. It hasn't been a mikra in Judaism probably since the poison pen of Ezekiel. It's simply an ingredient. And so without matzah, there is no salvation. And then they go from these things, and they'll have an annual event called Purim, which is based on the book of Esther, and an event which is incredulous, never occurred. They'll celebrate Hanukkah, based upon an event with the Maccabees that was an internal civil war, never occurred. They will take Towrah, which is our time, to be heralds for Dowd, to speak of what he has done and what he will do for his people, so that they avail themselves of his return on Kippurim, and they've turned it into the Babylonian Rosh Hashanah. Yep. And of course, they have denied that Pesach, Matzah, and Bikurim have been fulfilled. And they have inverted Kippurim so that rather than a day of reconciliation, it's a day of tormenting and harassing one's soul. I would say that is up there at the 9.9 and disastrously corrupt establishing of a destructive annual cycle to denigrate what I'm doing.
Yes, I agree.
But the world's most popular religion, the religion that has tormented Jews for longer than any other, established what they called was Good Friday. Yeah, boy, it's good to kill a Jew. And then we're not going to even mention what happens on the Shabat and the fulfillment of matzah because, well, we don't want to even speak of the Shabbat. We have our Sunday. So we're going to have the Passover lamb bodily resurrected, and then we're going to give him a new name. He's going to be Jesus. And then we're going to give him Dowd's title, Messiah, which they then made into Greek as Christ. And then we're going to give him Dowd's standing with God, which is the Son of God. Talk about establishing a destructive annual cycle, because they would make this their high holy day with Easter week every year, naming the holiday after Ishtar, the Queen of Heaven and Mother of God in the Babylonian and Assyrian religions. Congratulations. Here's your sign. You are irritating and stupid.
Yep.
And then they bore into my hands and feet. That comes from Hev Psalms, which has Ka'aru, a variation of Kara, dig, bore, pierce, while the Masoretic text has Kareri, like a lion. Ka mean like, and A-R-Y, a lion. My hands and feet. Well, these canines, they would be wolves, Roman and Pauline.
Mm-hmm.
Over time, their unifying political and corrupt religious testimony would create a new cycle of events from Easter to Christmas. In so doing, they would completely denigrate Dowd's sacrifice. There would be no provision for chag matzah on the religious calendar of Christians or Jews. By denying Dowd's great sacrifice, they would preclude their own participation in the covenant while blocking their path to God. The enormity of what he had done for the overwhelming preponderance of people was for naught, at least for the false witnesses. It was replacement theology at its worst. As the Romans struck their blows, pounding nails into Dowd's wrists, which were considered part of the hand in the first century, and into his heels, they ka'aru, bore through them, with primitive nails constructed of tapered iron rods. While using such crude implements in this excruciating fashion was repulsive, it went right through the nerves of the wrists and the Achilles of the between the heel and the ankle.
It's hard to think about.
Yes,
reprehensible. But there is a far greater crime here than murdering the Messiah and Son of God, the Dowd. He was there to die, but not there to be tortured.
Right.
If you're a Jew faithful to the religious traditions of rabbis, what I'm going to share ought to make you nauseous. To keep you from knowing that your Messiah Dowd served as the Pesach El, rabbis altered the passage to read, "Like a lion, my hands and feet." This was not a mistake. It was done on purpose. All these many years later, even with the Dead Sea Scrolls found at Nahal Hever in 1950, and the Septuagint confirming Ka'aru, bore, rather than Ka'ari, like a lion, Jewish scholars are still unwilling to acknowledge that Dowd, as a prophet, accurately described what he, as the great hero, endured. They argue in favor of a Masoretic text. The last vestige of denial comes by way of suggesting that the writing on the 2nd century BCE fragment, 150 years, almost 200 years before this occurred, over 1,000 years older than the oldest Masoretic text, is too faint to read with certainty. However, you can look it up online, as I have done, and you can see a picture of it yourself if you're still wondering who to trust. The word ends, I should say, with a wa, not with a yod. The hands and feet of the Passover lamb were nailed to an upright pillar on Moriah during the 4,000th observance of the Mikra. But the Romans who did so were not the only criminals seeking to negate those sacrifice. Rabbis played their role too. Since what I'm claiming regarding this prophecy is easily verified and accurate, it means that Dowd wrote that his hands and feet would be pierced 5 centuries before crucifixion was conceived by the Assyrians and 700 years before the piercing style of Roman execution. It also means that the most esteemed rabbis are liars who should not be trusted. Now, that ought to be obvious. The authors of the oral traditions are deceitful men who are willing to alter God's testimony to suit their own personal agendas. Flee from them. Expose them. Rebuke them. Trust Yahweh and rely on Dowd, not men. The prophet Zechariah, had a great deal to say about Yahweh's role and this sacrifice, and even specifically what Dowd had done. And since it is especially relevant to this passage, we'd be remiss if we didn't share Zechariah 12:10. Here's how it reads. And for a time, I will pour out upon the house of Dowd. And for a time, I will pour out upon the house of Dowd, and upon those who dwell in Jerusalem, a spirit of compassion and acceptance for those requesting mercy and clemency. Then they will be able to look to me, Eth Asher, accompanied by the one who they had reviled and pierced. And they will lament over him like one cries over the most uniquely special child and valued life, anguishing and infuriated over him, consistent with the anguish suffered over Ha-Bakor, the firstborn.
Wow.
Oh, my. What does the Mizmowr 89 tell us about the Bakor? He's Dowd. What do all the Psalms tell us about this unique child who is the Son of God? He's Dowd.
No.
You know, the second half of this was such an enigma to me. I didn't understand it until I went back to retranslate it. Because everyone wants us to believe that they looked upon me who they have pierced. We didn't pierce Yahweh. Yahweh is incorporeal. All of Yahweh will not fit into our universe, much less into a human body. We can't pierce God. He's spiritual. But we can sure as hell pierce his son, and we did. And that's why this says, Es Asher, to me, accompanied by the one who they had reviled and pierced. Dowd. And why is it that Israel is going to lament? And I can't imagine anything that would cause a Yahud to cry more than recognizing that it was Dowd, their Messiah, the Son of God, whom they pierced, who served as the Pisakael, who they have ignored, who they have denied. And all of this time, to know that Dowd volunteered to do this, to carry their guilt into Sheol and to deposit it there, and for his body to be tormented so that they might live. And to recognize that every Yahud, every Israelite that is there on the day of reconciliations when father and son return is there for a singular reason, that they've accepted this gift that Dowd has provided. Don't you think we're all going to be in tears?
Oh, we hope.
Absolutely. Yeah.
The man deserves our love, our admiration, our respect. Every one of us who are there are going to be there because he volunteered to do this. It fundamentally changes our entire perception. You know, we have known for a long time that God doesn't do anything alone if it's possible to do it through a person of his choosing. That's why he went to liberate the children of Israel from Mitzrayim with a broken down 80-year-old shepherd that had fled Mitzrayim because they were trying to kill him because he tried to defend a Hebrew slave.
Yeah.
But Yah went with Moshe. When building the ark, Yahweh didn't do it himself. He did it with Noach. When unifying his people and establishing Jerusalem as their capital, God didn't do it alone. He did it with Dowd. When trying to guide his people through the time that he would be born and the time that he would be anointed, God didn't act with Israel alone. He did it with Samuel. When God wanted to confront the prophets of Baal and Asherah, he didn't do it alone. He did it through Eliah. Well, there's no bigger event in the history of humankind than the fulfillment of Chag Matzah, Pesach, Matzah, and Bakurim, followed by Shabuah. For God to have done this alone would be completely out of character.
It's true.
And his son wanted to. His son volunteered. His son needed to do this for himself, for his people, for his son. And God recognized the argument that Dowd was making on behalf of him serving as the fulfillment of Chag Matzah was not only in his son's best interest. It was the only way to fulfill Chag Matzah. Because the conclusion of Chag Matzah is Bakurim, firstborn children. Well, who is Yahweh's firstborn? It's Dowd. There's no way to fulfill it without Dowd. He knew it.
Makes more
God
sense.
knew it. And here, then, in Zechariah, to read this, it's why I don't think you can be a Yehud. And I'm Goy, but I'm probably as Yehud as you can be as on the planet at the time, even though my DNA fulfills the prophecies that Yahweh has made about serving as his witness at this time. The fact is that I spend all day as a Yehud. And to have that perspective and to know that we stood by and allowed the Romans to torture our Messiah and King. And as bad as that is, we then denied that he had even fulfilled Pesach and Matzah on our behalf.
Yeah.
And then to recognize that we're only there to celebrate Yom Kippurim because we finally accepted this reality. And it was the moment that I translated Zechariah 12 and saw my mistake every time I'd been through it before, which is Eth Asher. Eth means with, Asher whom. And that follows, look at me, accompanied by Eth Asher, the one they had pierced. The moment I did that is when I realized that we were in for another rewrite. And, it's such a joy to be associated with such wonderful people in this process, because rather than saying, oh my God, we just spent, 2.5 years of our lives rewriting everything. But this is what we do. Mm-hmm. If we learn something that is vitally important, we go back and we correct what we have stated so that it is consistent and true from beginning to end. And it is a joy to do so. And just the response of everyone who has been part of this, the opposite of complaints. It's a joy.
If I may.
Go.
Oh, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Go ahead.
But even though a lot of times when we first started doing this openly about Dowd, there's the Mashiach, he's the fulfillment of Pesach and Matzah, and Bikurim. Everybody said, well, we don't want to lead with this. I think we do.
Yeah.
I'm over that a week ago. I said, no. This is the story. Are you kidding? You're trying to reach Yehudim. They know nobody should love Dowd better than they.
Yeah.
And this is the lead story of a lifetime for me. I'm just
it is the story of a lifetime. And it's the story of a lifetime, not because of who served as the Pesach Gael. And it isn't even that he wrote Mizmowr 22 or we read Zechariah 12 and we see predictions of what he was going to do, validating Yahweh's inspiration, validating prophecy, telling us we can trust what we're reading, which is profound. And it's not just that everything comes together in one picture, that the covenant is family, that Yahweh works through his family, that there's nobody who is more important to Yahweh's family than Dowd. I wrote that, Dowd was every man. Dowd was the most unique man. He was the man. He was every man. He was a most exceptional man. And that the more we appreciate this, the better. But the ultimate part of it is to understand the mindset of this man and the attitude of Yehudim and Israelites over the ages and why he volunteered to do this. It's the understanding of why. He volunteered to do it and why Yahweh agreed and enabled him to serve us in this way, and what it means going forward to all of us.
Yes.
It's the greatest discovery, I think, in human history.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's the greatest discovery in human history. And by the way, to say it's the greatest discovery of human history, this is not crediting the discoverers. It's crediting the one who did this and why he did it and what it means to us. It's one thing to discover where the Titanic sank and you say, well, that's swell. I like the pictures. That's pretty cool. What does it do for you? Nothing. But this discovery, it transformed your soul. It's the source of eternal life, of being perfected, of being adopted into God's family, of entering heaven and living forevermore as God's
asked, what is my son's name? And now we know.
But it personifies our familial, you said it from the start, familial covenant relationship. This is a family event, and it's done all by the family. My gosh. It just closes all the gaps. I mean, wow.
It does. It does, and it makes every prophecy, everything that Yahweh has said about Dowd, that he gets the lion's share of the inheritance, that he is my chosen one, that my criterion for choosing someone is different than what humans choose, that he is my Masiach, he is the Son of God, that he is the Lamb, that he is the Shepherd. He is the Zeroah, both the protective shepherd and the sacrificial lamb.
Yeah.
Now, Moshe wrote significant portions of the Torah, and Dowd lived the Torah more even than Moshe did.
Yeah.
Because his sacrifice is meaningless apart from the Torah. So now you know why Dowd wrote the 119th Mizmowr, explaining every letter that was used to comprise the Torah. He would live it. And now you know why Yahweh says he's coming back. He'll be as brilliant as the sun. So it is profound. I think we'll start here again next week, right at Zechariah 12:10. I'd like to share it again, and we'll talk about its implications a little more, and then continue through the Mizmowr. And I'm here to tell you too that from what we have learned now, Mizmowr 1, 2, 3, and 4 are a feast for the eyes.
Mm-hmm.
They affirm the same story, and it's the ultimate story for Yisrael. There's no aggravation over a Jesus, Christ, even a Yosha. It completely disembowels the religion that has been so caustic to Jews, Christianity, but it also destroys all of the credibility of Judaism in the process. So it's a clean sweep.
Yeah.
You get to embrace everything that you should hold dear. The man who exemplifies Yisrael, that united Yisrael, manned up and saved Yisrael. Marvelous story.
Lovely.
And its realization is the most transformational event in our lives. So it is a joy to be part of it, sharing it with you. And thank you all for listening to our program this evening, and we'll be back with you this time next week. Kirk, Dee, have anything you want to add before we close out this evening?
No, that says it all to me. It has been that transforming to me. It's like, I don't have words. I'm just amazed by it all. And so glad we're here.
It's wonderful to be at this point in time and to realize that our calling on Towrah wasn't just to call Yisrael home and back to Yahweh. It was to serve as our king's herald.
Yes.
We are here to herald his arrival. We're here to proclaim what he has done.
Well, you wrote something. I'll give you something before we go. You wrote a witness provides restoring and everlasting testimony or enduring of Yahweh, and it includes sharing evidence, information regarding Yahweh and eternal existence, and the plan for us, including the official position, or I call it the written record, reconciliation and restoration and salvation and compassion in the relationship. And I thought, I was impressed. I wrote that down and saw my little board chart thing. That's exactly what you're doing, and it's what we're all helping to do. And I'm just thrilled to be part of it. You and Dee and
there is
Jackie
a tremendous difference
Molly
between being a prophet and being a witness. We are witnesses.
Yeah.
And at this time, being a witness is vastly more important and effective than being a prophet. If Yahweh let's say that Yahweh reneged on his promise and he had another prophet. He said, that's the end. I'm done with prophets. And the last of the prophets was 2,450 years ago, almost 2,500 years ago, with Malachi. And just prior to him was Zechariah, whose words we were just reading here. And of course, Malachi ends by saying that one of those two witnesses is going to be Eliah. Doesn't name the other because that name would not have resonated with the audience because he had not yet been born. When you recognize that we have 2,500 years to validate the prophecies contained in those books, and therefore can prove that Yeshaya and Zachariah and Malachi and these Mizmowr are true. I mean, here we're reading from a Mizmowr that was written 700 years before the type of execution it describes was even invented. In fact, it was written 500 years before Rome even existed. Now, if God decided I want to go with another prophet, there's no way to validate that prophet's credentials. That person would be speaking out of his arse, because without a way to validate their credentials by being able to include prophecies of things that would be detailed and exacting that will be fulfilled in the future, there is no way to prove his credentials.
Right.
But as a witness, we're in an entirely different situation. we go to the prophets. That's why we translated here and just shared Zechariah 12. That's why we're reading from this translation of Mizmowr Psalm 22. Those prophets have been proven. So if we share with you what they have said and help you understand it in the context of what God has done and is doing, Dowd has done and will do, then we're vastly more credible and effective than if God were to say, I want to have a new prophet. And he doesn't need a new one. He's told us far more about what has happened and what's going to happen than any 10 people could process in a lifetime.
So true.
So it is vastly better to have a witness at this time, which is what Eliah is going to be when he returns, than it is to have another prophet. God knew it. He arranged it this way. And I hope those of you who are listening will recognize that you have a huge advantage in this approach because of the way that we are translating Yahweh's testimony by always putting within the parenthetical the generic form of the words so that if you're reading it online, you can go and copy and paste into your favorite search engine to validate its meaning and can verify for yourself if what we're conveying is true.
Yeah.
That's one of the advantages of the written word. Now here we're speaking to you, but I've gotten into a different routine. I used to do this program completely extemporaneously. I would read the translations, and then 100% of the commentary would be off the cuff. And I liked it because you were every time you read Yahweh's testimony, you're inspired to see new and additional insights, and it's fun to do that way. But something happened about 4 or 5 years ago, where the seriousness of this responsibility is a witness serving Yahweh for his people, and the inspiration God has provided to share insights vital to his people, I realized that the words that I was writing were far more important than any words I could speak. And that by writing them down, I gave the reader the opportunity to do what cannot be done with the spoken words. Why I don't watch online videos. They're essentially impossible to fact check.
Yeah.
But the written word is not. Everything that I've written is available free in its entirety at yadayah.com. And you can take everything and fact check it. And that's essential. That's why Yahweh always tells his prophets, I want you to communicate in writing. That's why he instructed us in this mission to prepare a sign, something that is written. So that's what we have done, and it is essential to you, for you, that you, if you're listening to this program, that you don't stop there. Go read the books. There, 27 of them are on the shelf, in addition to the 3 that I wrote prior to beginning Yada Yahowah. They're all free in their entirety. You can read them on your phone, on your tablet. You can read them on your computer. If you want the paperback versions, they're available royalty-free, as are hardback versions from Amazon. And even in the e-books, you can read this on a Kindle for, God, I think it's like 25 cents or 35 cents a volume. So we're offering it freely to you. As Amazon doesn't print books for free or ship them for free, they are royalty free.
Right.
We're doing this on your behalf. We're devoted to Yisrael coming home, to knowing the truth about Yahweh, to embracing Yahweh. And when you read things like Zechariah 12:10, there's an enormous satisfaction of being here at this time, having the privilege of sharing these words with you.
Yes.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, covenant family members, may Yah bless. We'll have a wonderful week. Hopefully there'll be some reports of some of you deciding they will register at the JerusalemPost.com and join me and posting within their comment section. Again, our goal is not to save Jews or Gentiles. It's not to proselytize. It's not to preach. It's not to compel anybody to make a choice. It's to put information out that causes people to think and to let them know there's a place they can go if they're searching for answers. But you need to do it in a way that's respectful of that platform. So if you do it, make certain that if you're posting something, you're posting it on the subject, you're offering a useful insight, and that what you're writing will cause somebody to think, and then perhaps to follow up and to see, again, search engines are powerful things. If you drop a hint, occasionally I'll drop Yahweh's name, or I'm writing under Yada Yah. I'll say things that if you were to copy and paste into a search engine, would take us to the site without ever giving the website.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yes,
do it respectfully in that. Don't be one of these badgerers. It's the first thing you'll do is turn people off.
Everybody.
Yes, as opposed to being thoughtful and encouraging people to listen to what you have to say. Well, have a wonderful Shabbat.
To be chosen.
Yes.
Yes. Be our choice, not our force.
Here's the reality of what we're doing, is that Yahweh chooses. Mm-hmm. I don't think there is anybody that actually comes to know Him that made that choice strictly on their own initiative.
Right.
Yahweh introduces Himself to people He's interested in knowing, and then we have the chance to either follow up on that or not. Now, to create a wider pool of people that might be interested in knowing, if we convince people to do as Abraham and Sarah did, walk away from politics and religion and consider listening to Yahweh, then we have made a great stride forward. Because right now there are too few people in Israel who are even prepared to listen. So we do have, we can do that. But then after that, Yah's going to decide who He wants to invite into His family. And then our job is to have enough information available that they'll know how to respond.
Yep.
So that's where we are.
Well said.
All right. Well, you all have a wonderful Shabbat. Shalom. We look forward to being with you this time next week. This is very, very emotional material we're going over. But it is also heartwarming and exceedingly important and enduring. So with that, I leave you and say, may Yah bless. Happy Shabbat.
Yeah. Shabbat Shalom, y'all. Night.
Happy Shabbat.